Well, it's the Grant County Fair. And in the background you're hearing live music on the stage. Meanwhile, I've mucked around with the display settings on the screen, and I think we're getting an approximation of the color. This is Messier 8. I believe it's the Lagoon Nebula. Kind of looks like a Van Gogh painting. We're operating at 128 flood, 42 decibels a gain. Not even the full sensitivity or the full exposure time, and we're getting quite a swirl of textures. Colors are pretty uniform, the bluish range, against a black backdrop of sky. Taking a break from my By the Numbers NGC series. The inevitable satellite passage. The crowd goes wild. Amateur astronomers would recognize this next nebula as the Trifid, Messier 20. One thing I might like to play with it on this is the pixelation that we're seeing. I'll do a little adjustment on that. Maybe a little too high on the contrast. Unfortunately, navigating in Chinese is not my specialty, and I have yet to discover a button that'll turn it back to English in terms of the hints on the screen, the labels. There's our view of maybe a Dada version, pointillistic version of the Trifid Nebula, Messier 20. We're now on to Messier 18 as the crowd once again goes wild. Playing with the buttons did not get rid of the pixelation. Requires more exploration. This is Messier 18, a very extensive area of reflective nebulosity. I'm not working data tonight. I am simply trying to give some images. Once again, approach them as Van Gogh, and maybe they'll look beautiful to you. But as far as pure astronomy is concerned, we're not there. Here we have the Swan, Messier 17. Like the other images, all overexposed. I may drop the flood rating down to 64 and we may review them all. But there's the color. And there's the texture to the outside. You can watch the image formulating. It is Friday night at the Grant County Fairgrounds here in John Day, Oregon. This is the night for live music. Here's the same Swan Nebula, Messier 17 at 64 flood. Which is equivalent to maybe a 12-inch scope. Although you wouldn't see it overexposed with the eye. The eye is much better able to accommodate a range of brightnesses than the CCD imager is. Still operating at 64 flood. We're now looking at Messier 16. Once again, as pure art, attractive enough. As astronomy, have to look this up, but I believe M16 is the Eagle Nebula, and I've not had such a high contrast view in the past. So I'm kind of impressed by this. Now back to Messier 8, the Lagoon Nebula. Once again at 64 flood. Still a bit overexposed. And before moving on, I'll drop it down to 32. Here's our 32 flood view of Messier 8. Still plenty to be seen on the screen. Only the very center of it is overexposed at this point. And yet, there's plenty still to delight the eye. Tried to go to Messier 20, but the scope wanted to flip on the mount. Didn't want to really do an equatorial flip at this point, so we've gone to Messier 18, and we've pretty much lost the nebulosity now at 32 flood. Here we have a view of Messier 17, the Swan Nebula. Areas of overdriving the brightness are diminished now at 32 flood, looking like a pretty good view here. On to Messier 16. At this point, Messier 16 has lost pretty much all of its nebulosity, and we see the open cluster in all of its diverse beauty. At 32 flood, roughly an 8-inch scope, 6 to 8 inch, although we're seeing the central star, so that's magnitude 14. We're not overdriving the image. We can see the central star. It typically takes a scope of 8 inches aperture. We're only getting a brief hint of the oblate football shape. We're seeing mostly the hourglass shape right now, the dumbbell. But we are seeing color. This is at 32 flood. I don't expect to see as much of the crescent, but that's our next stop, NGC 6AAA at 32 flood. Wow, had to bump it back up to 128 flood to get this view of the Crescent Nebula. And the full extent of it is becoming quite visible on the screen. As well as color. Now, when I was playing with the buttons on the display, it basically flipped the screen over, so I'll have to screw around with that. But you can even see some interior nebulosity in the cluster. Basically, I attribute to that probably to pushing up the screen luminosity from 0 to 50%. It may have actually helped improve the contrast across the screen as well. There's so many parameters to play with in terms of trying to get good image performance between the display screen and the imager itself. You can really get lost in it. There's our view of the Crescent Nebula, NGC 6AAA. Let's go have a look at the dumbbell, and then we'll tour the veil a little bit. Here at 128 flood, we can watch the dumbbell take form at 128 flood. Despite the fact that it only takes 6 1.5 second exposures, I've noticed the image doesn't fully compile for at least 30 to 40 seconds. Typically can take 30 seconds just for a ghost image from a previous bright study to disappear from the screen. But here we are, we're getting some beautiful color in it. Unfortunately, it's overexposed, but we had a lower exposure image earlier. It would be very intriguing to be able to overlay different exposure images on top of one another and subtract out anything that's too bright. I'm sure that's being done by photographers and amateur astronomers all along. It's just not a particular pursuit that I am going to follow up on. But there's our dumbbell, SA-27. Here we see NGC 6960, otherwise known as the Witch's Broom, and I believe that's 61 Cygni there. It could be a different number, but it's about a 4.5 magnitude star, which shows you even how visible to the unaided eye star can overwhelm the imager at these high settings. Here's our view of the Witch's Broom. Give it a chance to stabilize after I disturb the mouth a little bit with my cough. As you know, this is a supernova remnant from about 15,000 years ago, I believe, when it blew up. It's expanding many light years through space at this point. But technical details are not of interest this evening. We just want to get the views. Here we have NGC 6979, part of the veil. The veil is actually quite large, about 2 degrees in diameter. You really need to use a low power scope to see the whole thing. Maybe a 4-inch and 25x would give a good view. You use a filter. I believe I'm actually using a filter at this point. I haven't checked it, to block extraneous light. And you can get a very good view through a 4-inch telescope. It's at 25x. Here's our view of NGC 6979. The Veil Nebula divides into an eastern and a western component. We're now at the eastern veil, NGC 6992. It gives you the best view of various degrees of texture. You can see that very nicely on the screen. Quite beautiful. This part of the veil itself is, we're only seeing about 15 arc minutes of it there. It actually extends out over about at least a degree. So at least 4 times what you're seeing here is visible. This is the most central portion of it, however. Very, very nice. So here's our view of the Crescent Nebula, NGC 6888. It was probably more present in color than it is in black and white, although most everything is still there. And with this, signing off, Carpe Noctem.